Hey there, fellow travelers. Welcome to the Tolkien Road, episode 390, or episode 20 in the Do Not Be Hasty Reckoning. I'm calling this one The Power of Pity. In this episode, we continue through Lord of the Rings, Book 1, Chapter 2, The Shadow of the Past. Greta, yo ho ho.
Yo ho ho?
Uh-huh.
And a bottle of rum?
Uh-huh.
Or what are we doing?
Sure, whatever
Yo
you want to
ho
add.
ho?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah, a bottle of rum sounds good. Do you want to
Right on.
add something?
No.
No.
No, I was just curious what you had.
Oh.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a little cliche, but I feel like it works.
Yeah.
Yo ho ho. And a bar of chocolate.
Bar of chocolate, yeah.
Bar of chocolate and a bottle
And
of
a-
rum. I'm good.
Dark chocolate almond.
Oh.
Mm-hmm.
That sounds delicious as
Yep.
well. Yep.
They are
Especially if they
delicious.
have sea salt on them.
Mm-hmm.
Sweet, salty, crunchy.
Right
Yes,
on.
please.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Trader Joe's, it's kind of pirate vibes.
Oh, yeah, that's
Yeah.
true. I like how that all, work together.
Worked out.
You weaved it all into a marvelous web.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Marvelous, simply marvelous. Before we begin, we'd like to give a double up air five to our amazing fellowship. Stick 'em up, fellowship. 3, 2, 1. Whoopsht. Nice.
Pretty good. Yep.
Special thanks to this episode's executive producers, Kaitlyn of Tea with Tolkien, John R., KG, and Arendelle Hope.
Yes. Thank you, guys.
Also, a shout out to those celebrating their fellowship anniversary in September of 2024, Alan C., Stephanie B., Dustin Q., and Robert S. Thank you so much for sticking with us over the years.
Mm-hmm.
In this episode of Do Not Be Hasty, we continue through The Shadow of the Past as Gandalf explains how Bilbo's pity for Gollum may in fact rule the fate of many. This section begins with the words, "A heavy silence fell in the room," and ends with, "Try," said Gandalf, "try now." This section takes place April 13th of the Third Age 3018, or Shire Reckoning 1418. We pick up in medias res from the last section, continuing from Gandalf's account of Gollum's journeys over the last several years. So we kind of left off with talking some about this last time, but we get a little more specifics on this, Greta.
Mm-hmm.
Why would anyone ever go to Mordor, and specifically Gollum? Why would Gollum go to Mordor? Basically, the answer is what I alluded to. Sauron is able to summon dark things, and Gollum goes there seeking help and exacting revenge upon Bilbo.
Mm-hmm.
So somehow he gets this sense that, and maybe it's not some kind of spidey sense. Maybe it's just maybe he overhears a conversation amongst the orcs, right? He overhears a conversation amongst orcs or something like that. They're talking about being summoned back to Mordor, and he gets some notion that someone in Mordor could possibly help him in getting revenge, right?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
And getting and getting his precious back. All of these things. But because Gollum goes back to Mordor, Sauron has learned that the One has been found, that the One Ring has been found. So let's read a little bit about that. This is Gandalf speaking. "Yes, alas, through him the enemy has learned that the One has been found again. He knows where Isildur fell. He knows where Gollum found his ring. He knows that it is a great ring, for it gave long life." Interesting. So the great rings give long life.
Mm-hmm.
"He knows that it is not one of the three, for they have never been lost, and they endure no evil." The three being the three elvish rings. For they are not lost, and they don't endure evil. That's an interesting point to me. I'm not sure what it means by they don't endure evil, but I digress. "He knows that it is not one of the 7 or the 9, for they are accounted for. He knows that it is the One, and he has at last heard, I think, of hobbits and the Shire." So Sauron is able to figure out that the ring that Gollum is hungry to get his hands back on is, in fact, the One Ring. Ooh, lost my place there. Let's see if I can find it again. Yeah, there we go. And just kind of by process of elimination, right? So he realizes Gollum is obviously a lot older than he should be, right? He's lived a lot longer than a creature of whatever kind he is should. So it must bestow long life.
Mm-hmm.
So it is a great ring, and then by process of elimination, he figures out it must be the one, right? He also realizes that, we learned a little bit later, he realizes that that Gollum is from the region where the ring where Isildur, where the ring slipped off of Isildur. So he knows, he kind of is able to piece those aspects of it together. So any questions on any of that, Greta? Makes sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
So we come next to, what we've been talking about over the last couple of episodes, which is this question of pity and mercy, right? Let's read this passage, because I think it's a very important one. It's a little bit of a longer one, but we'll go ahead and read this. So Greta, do you want to read this, the yellow highlighted portion?
Yes, I do. But I feel a sneeze coming on.
Oh.
So, okay. Here we go.
All right.
You're good. What a pity that Bilbo did not stab that vile creature when he had a chance. Pity? It was pity that stayed his hand. Pity and mercy. Not to strike without need. And he has been well rewarded, Frodo. Be sure that he took so little hurt from the evil and escaped in the end because he began his ownership of the ring so, with pity. I am sorry, said Frodo, but I am frightened. I do not feel any pity for Gollum. You have not seen him, Gandalf broke in. No, and I don't want to, said Frodo. I can't understand you. Do you mean to say that you and the elves have let him live on after all those horrible deeds? Now, at any rate, he is as bad as an orc and just an enemy. He deserves death. Deserves it? I dare say he does. Many that live deserve death, and some that die deserve life. Can you give it to them? Then do not be too eager to deal out death and judgment, for even the very wise cannot see all ends. I have not much hope that Gollum can be cured before he dies, but there is a chance of it, and he is bound up with the fate of the ring. My heart tells me that he has some part to play yet, for good or ill, before the end, and when that comes, the pity of Bilbo may rule the fate of many. Yours not least. In any case, we did not kill him. He is very old and very wretched. The wood elves have him in prison, but they treat him with such kindness as they can find in their wise hearts.
Yeah, so there's a lot here. We've been talking about this topic of pity and the role it plays over the course of the last several episodes. Greta, you remarked in episode 387 that you don't like the word pity.
I don't.
So tell me more about that.
I feel like pity, and like just kind of what that word in itself implies is like feeling sorry for someone, right? Like, oh, I pity you. There's no action associated with that. It's just an emotion saying, oh, sucks to be you, right? And I don't like there doesn't like no good, I feel like, comes from pity. Like it's just it's kind of an empty emotion. I prefer the word empathy or mercy, because I feel like those have a more, like they just imply more care, more like they're just a little bit like those words imply an action, like you're not just feeling sorry for someone, like you are actually, like that's part of it, like you're sorry for their circumstance, but then you are also like supporting them or doing something to help them through it. Does that make sense?
So you don't have a problem with the idea of pity, you just like, or
No.
like with the like kind of general concept, you just like, you think the word is, and it's possible that the word has like, was like between when we live and when Tolkien lived has taken on different connotations because of different settings. I think in the case of Tolkien and Lord of the Rings, I think pity is a very powerful concept and probably has is intended to have the proper connotations, right? So here, pity is an emotion that leads to Bilbo like not taking action against, like when he could have, right? He very well could have killed Gollum, right? And maybe even been justified in doing so, right? But he chooses not to, right? So it is, and it's equated. I think it's kind of equated with mercy here as well, right? Not to strike without need.
Agreed. I just prefer the word mercy
Yeah.
because that just implies like that you are. I guess I just feel like the word pity is just kind of empty.
I think for me, when I hear the word pity, sometimes it can imply sort of a, like it's a word that, like a kind of a haughtiness, like
Yes.
you know,
Yeah.
like a word that somebody uses when they're looking down on somebody and they're like,
Mm-hmm.
"Oh, you poor thing,"
Right.
you know.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
Oh, I pity you. You know, it's like it's
Mm-hmm.
something. It's like a passive aggressive thing. Like it can almost
It
have
can
a passive
be.
aggressive sort of connotation
Mm-hmm.
to it. But I don't think that's what it. I mean, Tolkien certainly doesn't mean that
No,
here,
I don't
right?
think he does either.
It's probably in the proper, in the really proper sense of the term, right? That it's a. I mean, Gandalf really like casts it as a virtue here, right? That it's a virtue that Bilbo has pity, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like has this feeling of, and I think it's because he, like, I think empathy is probably what he means, right? Now, empathy, I don't
Mm-hmm.
think was yeah, I'm sure it was a word back then, but I don't think it was. I don't think it was kind of the used in the same manner that it's used, like, or is often as it's used now, right? Pity was probably a much more common sort of term than
Agreed.
empathy is.
Yeah, I really like what you said about the implied haughtiness of the word pity because I think that's mainly what I was trying to get at. Like it's just kind of a like, you know,
It's almost like
oh,
you're
I'm
mocking
so
somebody when you say
much.
like
Yeah, a
you,
little bit.
oh, I pity you, you know.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
I think you're right. Like I think it's probably, you know, maybe a word that has taken on that connotation over, you know, more recent times. Um I remember when I was in nursing school, like one of my classes was talking about, I don't know, patient care or like nursing care or
Mm-hmm.
whatever. I remember one of my professors making this like pretty like strong distinction between
Mm-hmm.
sympathy and empathy. And you know, they were talking about how sympathy is you know, it's just kind of an emotion. It's like feeling sorry for someone. So I feel like maybe sympathy and pity can kind of be equated.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas empathy, when you're being empathetic with someone, like you're actually like taking on their burden,
Hmm.
right? That you are supporting them in a way. Like there's an implied intimacy there, which I feel like mercy is kind of synonymous then with empathy. So maybe that's kind of where like the root of my feelings on that word lie. But there's just more of, you know, like kind of a taking on or of a, you know, journeying with someone through something hard when
Yeah.
it comes to being empathetic.
So check this out. This is interesting to me. So this is from uh, Etym Online, which is like, I guess, an etymology site,
Okay.
and it has this like graph of the usage of the word pity, right, over
Oh.
time,
Huh.
going back to 1800, and the blue is the make that a little bigger so that it's easy for folks to see. Um, the blue would be the like used as a noun, and then V would be or the red would be used as a verb. Um, but it's interesting, right around kind of, you know, it trended, the use of it trended downward over the course of the 20th century, right?
Mm.
And I'm not sure if this is, you know, maybe it didn't trend down like this in England as much.
Hmm.
But it's actually made a resurgence, and at the start of this century, a pretty strong one. You know, it looks like
Hmm.
in terms of usage.
Interesting.
Um, and also interesting is that it's related to the word piety, right? So,
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
but you know, in the original sense, it seems to have had, you know, connotations of compassion, kindness, generosity of spirit. So I think it's one of these
Okay.
words that probably, you know, through usage and took I don't know what the right term for a word like this would be, but it becomes it through a cultural transformation becomes a word that is almost like a mockery of itself, right?
Hmm.
Um, and you know, it does. I think it's probably because when we, you know, I think in my mind when I hear someone use the word pity, it implies the person that is using it has like is holding a position of superiority over the other person, right? That I think is probably why it trended down in terms of, that would be my theory, right? Hypothesis, why it trended down in usage over the course of the 20th century. But everything makes a comeback eventually and becomes fashionable again. So, there you go. But this is interesting. So this is empathy. Empathy wasn't even used, it looks like, in the 19th century. And then early 20th century kind of rose to prominence. And then in around 1980, it shot up, right? So it's become a much more popular word. So there you go. Yeah.
Very interesting.
Yeah, it is kind of interesting. But anyway, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, but I do feel like now that, we've been talking about this and I've been thinking about like the context of the word pity, it actually is appropriate. I feel like in this instance that, when you think about the relationship that existed between Bilbo and Gollum, right? Like just their circumstances. Bilbo was like in a position of superiority to Gollum, right? I mean, he was a lot healthier, right? He was like a lot more like present in his mind, right? Like he was a clearer thinker. So, in a way, you're like, okay, I guess pity is an appropriate word here.
Yeah.
But I do prefer mercy.
Yeah, I hear you. And I mean, I don't think, and again, like I don't think Bilbo was necessarily like looking down on Gollum. I think sometimes like it doesn't mean you have to be like, like sometimes you just look at somebody and you're like, oh man, you just really feel bad. Like it's like just to feel bad for them, right? And that doesn't always mean you can do something to help them, but maybe it just means like you don't like, maybe they take advantage of you in some small way and you're just kind of like, I just feel bad for them and I don't want to like, I don't really want to exact any kind of revenge from them. So, anyway, is that?
Yeah, no, that could be.
Yeah.
That could definitely be. And there are circumstances where, like you can't always empathize with someone. Like you don't like you just can't because you don't, you've never been in that situation or, like for whatever reason, like it's more like empathy is just not like, appropriate or even possible.
Yeah.
So, pity is definitely better than no pity. Right?
Well, yeah, I mean, depending on the situation,
Yeah.
I think in this case, Gandalf certainly sees it playing a very important role. So, to bring it back to the text here, I mean, Frodo says, I don't feel pity for Gollum. And Gandalf's like, you haven't seen him, right? You don't know you don't know how pitiful he is, right? So this is they're not being sarcastic in their use of this word. They're being very much like Gandalf is being like, he's pitiful, right? He is worthy of pity because of the state that he is in. And then it gets to this whole question of, like who deserves death, right? And Frodo says, at any rate, he is as bad as an orc and just an enemy. He deserves death. And Gandalf says, deserve it? I dare say he does. Many that live deserve death, and some that die deserve life. Can you give it to them? Then do not be too eager to deal out death and judgment. For even the very wise cannot see all ends. I have not much hope that Gollum can be cured before he dies, but there is a chance of it, and he is bound up with the fate of the ring. In all of this, I hear like the words of Christ, judge not lest you be judged, very strongly, and it kind of gives me a slightly different perspective on those words, right? In everything that Gandalf says here, right? Because he says, you're really like, you're not the one that needs to deal out death and judgment, right? Like, that's, I mean, I don't even think Gandalf really feels like he's worthy of that, right? So, I think that, this is all kind of pointing in the direction that pity will have that Bilbo's choice there to pity Gollum will be far more significant than one might realize, than one would necessarily realize, right? That it's going to play a much larger role in the story.
It's interesting because I'm thinking about like the devil's advocate point of view here. And you're like, well, if Bilbo had killed Gollum, right? Like it would have saved them a lot of trouble. I mean, he never would have, gone to Mordor and include Sauron into the existence of the hobbits and the Shire and like all this stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I think it's really interesting that the pity that Bilbo exerted here really, it was obviously mostly beneficial for Bilbo because it protected him from the evil effects of the ring.
Yeah,
right?
well, there's that aspect of it, right? And I think that's been, has been identified. Gandalf has called that out, but there's also this greater sense that Gandalf has that, again, like because of this choice that the choice itself to show mercy, rather than striking a death blow in judgment, like that in and of itself, it almost seems like a weak action, right? Because like a powerful warrior might have just been like, "Oh, you pathetic thing," and like just put it into him, right? But it's almost like the action has invisible reverberations throughout the course of the tale, that increasingly are for the good, right? For the ultimate good, for the ultimate victory, and to counteract the effects of the ring. And I think that's clearly one of the things that Tolkien was getting at with this story overall, right? Now, I mean, most of you who are listening probably know how the story ends ultimately. But shout out to any of those who are watching and have not finished Lord of the Rings, right? Don't know how it ends. But there, obviously, like if you've read it, how the story ends, and that the greater, and I wouldn't say it's just in the big moment, but it's like that there are other considerations of how Gollum plays into the story and is able to, despite himself, right, lead to the happy ending of the whole story, right? Right.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting to think about, like the alternate path here, right? I mean, if Bilbo does kill Gollum at this point, I mean, if history stays true, Bilbo would end up being the next Gollum, right? Yeah. And so you just think about all the fallout from that. You're just like, whoa, okay.
Yeah, and would the story have turned out the same, right? Like in the sense of the end outcome. If Bilbo had just been one more in the line of Isildur to Daigle to Smeagol,
right?
What would have become of Bilbo? Would he have come back to the Shire and eventually he becomes this little hobbit dark lord of the Shire, and maybe he offs Gandalf at some point, right? Because he thinks Gandalf is wise to his ring, and takes a really dark turn from there, right?
You're making me miss all those choose your own adventure books that I read as a kid.
I don't want to read that story. That's not the image of Bilbo I ever want to have, right? But and then eventually Sauron hears of this hobbit dark lord who's arising in the west, and so he just goes and just smacks him down, and and takes the ring for himself, right? And Sauron comes back to power that way, right? But again, this all kind of gets back to the intervention of that we talked about in previous sections of some greater power at play, right? A mysterious force power at play that led Bilbo to be the one who would have the ring next.
Right.
yeah, and ultimately the choice, Bilbo's choice to have pity, to show mercy, rather than strike, a kind of the death blow of judgment, right? Upon Gollum, will bear much fruit, right? It'll bear a ton of fruit. It's not always obvious, but it's going to have many consequences for the better. Many consequences for the better. All right, so Frodo regrets the ring, right? Like, he's like, why in the world did you let me keep this thing, right? Like, why did you want me to have this ring? And Gandalf basically says, like, these rings have a way of being found. He says, make you. Haven't you been listening to all that I have said? You are not thinking of what you are saying, but as for throwing it away, that was obviously wrong. These rings have a way of being found. In evil hands, it might have done great evil. Worst of all, it might have fallen into the hands of the enemy. Indeed, it certainly would, for this is the one, and he is exerting all his power to find it or draw it to himself. The mystery, Sauron has a way of drawing the rings of power to himself, and this feels like sort of a there's the technology of the ring, which is still mysterious, but like the technology of the ring at play. But there's also, I read this, and when I read it this time again, it reminded me of words of Jesus, right? So, kind of this woo-woo kind of power, when Jesus says in one of the Gospels, he said, when the Son of Man is lifted up, I will draw all men to myself, right? Just to paraphrase, right? So, he's gonna draw everyone to himself. And this made me kind of think about Sauron putting out his evil thought. Of course, certainly not to equate Sauron and Jesus, but like that, just the sense of this greater spiritual force kind of putting itself out into the world, an invisible force, but then nevertheless kind of is drawing, drawing various figures over there. So, any thoughts on that, Greta?
No, I think it's a okay. Cool insight.
All right. And then Gandalf admits that he regrets the peril in which he has placed Frodo, but it was a risk he had to take because of the stakes, right? So 9 years before this, he knew very little for certain. And so his kind of best bet was, I'm going to leave this ring with Frodo, who doesn't know anything about it. It apparently is safe here, right? He's going to keep it secret, and I need to go out and figure out exactly what this ring is. So Gandalf essentially says, like, I was a risk I had to take, right? Like, you were the best bet. And I think Frodo doesn't view this as a compliment right now, but Frodo should view it as a compliment, basically saying, like, I knew I could trust you with the ring, right? And not knowing exactly what it was, for sure, I knew I could trust you with it, not to let anything bad happen to it, or to let it fall into someone else's hand, or even really just to like let anybody else know that it really existed, right? So.
Yeah, well, that's a cool way to reframe the situation for sure. Because I know, I can really identify with Frodo here. I'll be like, what the heck, like. Why, why me? Why did you put this on me? Why have you chosen to put me in all this danger? Like, this is worse than I could have ever imagined. But you're right. Like, it does show that Gandalf trusted Frodo, which is very high praise for Frodo.
Yeah,
for sure. Yeah.
So Frodo's response to this, of course, is like, well, why not just try to destroy it, right? Like, why didn't you just try to destroy it in the first place? And we leave off with Gandalf basically saying, oh, destroy it. Great idea. Why don't you try? Right. And so that's where we'll pick up for next time. Greta, what did I miss?
Yeah.
Anything?
No, I just think it, I feel like, like this is, Frodo is like showing truly like how much, I don't know. I feel like I left this section of the book like feeling like Frodo, you're such a fool, right? Like, I mean, and I could identify it with him, right? I mean, it's like he's reacting the way any anyone would,
Yeah.
right, to this information. But then Gandalf just has this way of, like, just turning everything on its head. And then you end up being like, well, I guess I'm an idiot. I mean, it's just like, ooh. I mean, it makes you, like, obviously, of course, like, Gandalf is a Maya, so it's not like Frodo's any match for him. But I just feel like this last little bit here where Gandalf's like, why don't you just destroy it? And Gandalf's like, oh, yeah, sure. Go for it. Try it. And he's like, how would you do it? And Frodo's like, well, I suppose you could hammer it or melt it, Like, that's true. Like, I'm like, yeah, hammer it or melt it. Duh. Like, that's what you do with metal. That's how you destroy metal. So, anyway, it just made me chuckle a little bit.
Well, ultimately, of course, the solution is to melt it, right? But you got to melt it in the right fire.
It's got to be a very specific fire.
Yeah.
Yep.
All right. Well, it's a staggering thought to consider that Bilbo's pity, a feeling of sorrow and compassion caused by the suffering and misfortunes of another, may in fact be the first great blow struck in the War of the Ring. For me, this is a lesson of the Lord of the Rings that has impressed itself upon me time and time again. In the next episode, Frodo is faced with the strange power of the ring for the first time and begins to realize what will be required to destroy it once and for all. Stay tuned.
We hope you enjoyed this episode. If you did, please consider supporting us in one or all of the following ways. First, join the Fellowship of the Road by visiting patreon.com/Tolkien Road. When you join the Fellowship of the Road, it helps us to keep on evering on and lands you some cool perks along the way. Learn more at patreon.com/Tolkien Road.
Second, if you're watching, hit that like button. Don't forget to subscribe and let us know what's on your mind in the comments below.
Finally, subscribe, rate, and review us on iTunes or the platform of your choice. If you are a 5-star fan of the Tolkien Road, you can really help us out by heading over to iTunes or your preferred source for the show and dropping us a rating and review. When you do that, it helps get the word out about the Tolkien Road and helps us to keep on evering on.
As always, keep the correspondence coming and we'll do our best to respond to you somehow and at some point. With Do Not Be Hasty, we'll let the mail pile up and then do a big mailbag episode at the end of each chapter. While we can't promise you that your mail will be read on air, you miss 100% of the shots you don't take, so drop those comments and send those emails.
Finally, don't forget to stop by truemythspress.com for great merch like super styling and comfy Tolkien Road t-shirts, Two Trees camper mugs, and signed copies of John's books, Tolkien's Requiem and Tolkien's Overture. Once again, that's truemythspress.com. Thank you for supporting our work with your purchase.
To close, as always, we'd like to thank our amazing fellowship. We know all of you have as well as we should like, and we've thanked less than half of you half as well as you deserve. Special thanks to the following: John R.,
Kaitlyn of Tea with Tolkien,
KG,
Arendelle Hope,
Emilio P.,
Jonathan D.,
Richard K.,
Paul D.,
Julia,
Wordy,
Chris B.,
Tour91,
Carolyn S.,
Emil K.,
Brian O. II,
Jonathan R.,
Matthew W.,
Daniel D.,
Harrison C.,
Jason C.,
Seb M.,
Wilbo Baggins,
Ms. Anonymous,
Andrew T.,
Red Hawk,
Shannon S.,
Brian O. I,
Zeke F.,
James L.,
Chris L.,
Azia V.,
Ish of the Hammer,
Teresa C.,
David of Pints with Jack,
and Eric B.
Thank you guys.
Finally, thanks to all for watching and or listening. Until next time, the road goes ever on.
Bye, y'all.
Bye-bye.